Welcome, everybody, to Walking with the Savior podcast. I'm your host, John Merrill Kirkman, and I'm so excited to be here today with a new friend, John Boyle. I recently read John's book, The Appalachian Kid, and I was fascinated with his journey, his story. And wow, buckle up, people. This is going to be a great story. John, tell us a little bit about yourself.
John, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on your show. I'd be happy to share just a little bit about myself. So I'm currently living in Charleston, South Carolina, but most of my life I've lived in the Mountain State, West by God, Virginia, population 1.8 million. And it's a small state, and it's a great place to live and to grow up. And I'm married. I have 2 children. And my oldest is on his way to college, and my youngest is on his way to kindergarten. I got blessed with some space there. And really, I've lived a very interesting life. I haven't always been Christian, and I've struggled a lot in my childhood and in my early adulthood. And I share those struggles and my life in a raw and honest account in my memoir, Appalachian Kid, which was published in September of 23. And was an Amazon bestseller and continues to do well. And I've gotten a lot of opportunities to speak on podcasts with gentlemen like yourself, and just, reach out and give people hope and help those in need and struggling at the moment. So looking forward to the show.
Yeah, I actually listened to the Appalachian Kid on Audible, and I listened to it in one day. It was one of those books that I didn't want to stop. I was fascinated how raw it was, and then how real he was about his belief in God and how that impacted his life. And I was very touched by your book, and I reached out to John and said, hey, let's get you on this podcast, and he was very gracious to join us today, and so I'm very appreciative. Why don't you just start us out with your childhood, John, because that's really where you start in the book, so let's get into that.
Let's do it. So I grew up in the 1980s in a small mining, farming, and timbering community in the Appalachian Mountains. It's right on the northeastern corner of the convergence of Pennsylvania and Maryland and West Virginia. And really, I grew up in a nice area. It was a whole lot easier growing up in the 80s than it is, I think, today, right? And the nature of growing up there was you were outside all the time, and you didn't have to worry about locking your doors, and you could go out and play with your friends and just come home when you wanted to, and there were really no worries. And really, there was something going on in my home that paralleled my childhood that really, it gave me a lot of difficulty and also a lot of confusion. And it's rather common in our society. And so I grew up in an abusive, violent home. And that created many, many difficulties for me. And it continues to do so at 47 years old. And the internal adversity has never ceased. But, just kind of going back with my childhood, I grew up Catholic. I knew God, I knew Jesus from my earliest memories on. And I believe that my parents intended and taught me the right things as far as religion. And I struggled with it, to be honest with you, as time went on, because of the nature of what was happening in my home. And at first, when I was growing up, I didn't really know that I was necessarily in a home that was different than others. And I started to realize that when I started having sleepovers at friends' houses, and would just see or hear things and just be completely caught off guard. Being at my best friend's house and hearing my best friend and my best friend's mother tell each other I love you. I mean, I was looking at them like, you guys say that stuff? I thought that was only on movies. And it's just,
Wow.
I'm not finding any fault with my parents.
Yeah.
This book isn't about them. This book is about the goodness of God, right? And so as time bore on and I got into 5th and 6th grade, I really struggled. The altercations between my mother and I ramped up as I got older. And really, I found myself coming into school in elementary school and disassociating with my surroundings and trying to make sense of what was going on in my home life. And that was portrayed in a different way to my teachers. They received that as I was a daydreamer, or I was lazy, or I was checked out. And so as I would come to class unprepared without my homework being done, and I would be zoned out, for lack of a better word, my teachers would send notes home that just said, he's a daydreamer, he's lazy, he's not doing his work. And that just, basically dumped gas on a fire. And so by sixth grade, I almost failed out. I almost had to repeat sixth grade. And I remember, and this is in my book, I remember going to a parent-teacher conference and my teacher telling my parents, this kid will never make it to college, much less graduate. And so that was, I don't know that I heard that from many teachers, but that was more of a common theme when I would bring my grades home. The things I would hear would not be good, right? I'm going to be a truck driver, or I'm going to be this or that, that obviously was not true. And what I learned later in life is that God doesn't, people don't determine your destiny, God does. And Joel Osteen says that. I love that statement. And it's so true. So that's the essence of my childhood. One more thing I'll say to that. I defended myself on a regular basis in altercations as a child against a parent. And because I chose to do that, I believe my treatment was more harsh than maybe it was before I started doing that. And so by 15, really the altercations became so bad that my father basically recommended that I go to a boarding school and leave the house. And I did. I took that opportunity and I left. And that was the essence of growing up in a small town in Kingwood, West Virginia, in a violent home from my earliest memory until 15.
There was a story in the book where your first year boarding school, at the end of the year, you met with the head of the school. Can you tell us about that experience?
Yes. So I went to a boarding school outside of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was around 3 hours from my home where I grew up. And I went there as a sophomore. And really the structure of the boarding school was much different than a public school. And as a boarding student, you were given grades every month, and you were given a class ranking, and you were also given effort grades. And you weren't given those in the form of a report card. You sat down and you met with the head of school. And so the story you're referring to was my first grade reading. And the head of school was a man named Mr. Pigeon. And Mr. Pigeon at one time was the longest serving head of school in the country. He was, I want to say he was over 40 years head of school at the Kiski school where I went. And so when I went to this grade reading, he was just looking at the papers and really, kind of making eyebrow lifts. And I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea what my grades were. And then he read them, and they were deplorable. I almost failed 10th grade there. And my class rank was next to last. And I really struggled in all of my classes. And I just could not keep up with the speed. But I was also having a lot of what I now know as symptoms of PTSD in high school and even before high school. But really, I left my home, but those memories didn't leave my head. And in the early 1990s, the focus and the onus on mental health and awareness just wasn't there yet, right? And so it was all internalized. And when I sat down for my grade reading, I was really distraught. And one of my teachers, a man named Mark Orsatti, we call him Mr. O, he was a Spanish teacher, and he was also a dorm parent. and he spoke up and he said, "Mr. Pigeon, John's having a tremendous amount of difficulty and he is trying." And once Mark Orsatti told Mr. Pigeon those words, Mr. Pigeon looked at me and he said, "Okay, we're going to get behind you and we're going to focus on your effort. And if you can get your effort grades up from B's to A's, you'll be my hero." And I struggled my entire sophomore year. But by my junior year, all of my teachers plowing into me, dorm parents teaching me how to study, my football coach really helping me understand how to prepare, right, in preseason. All those things converged, and really I got it together in my junior year. And my first grade meeting, I made the honor roll, and Mr. Pigeon remembered it. He remembered what he told me a year before. And so to have someone be encouraging, to have a mentor, even though I didn't look at him as a mentor, or my football coach or my teachers as mentors, really, had I not have gone to that school and had those people, those men and women in my life, many, many people, they changed the trajectory of where I was headed. And because of their mentorship and what they did for me, I stood a chance and I made it to college. So
That's
my sixth grade
phenomenal.
teacher was wrong, John. Yeah.
Let's go. What do you think about that teacher who stood up and said he's having a hard time, but he's trying?
I love him to death. He was at my book opening, and I didn't tell that story, but I gave him the chapter that I wrote about my time at Kiski. And just, he was the only teacher I had that was still teaching there when I published. And I wanted to get his permission to tell the story. And he had forgotten it. And when I spoke at my book opening, he was there and tear-filled. He didn't realize what he'd done. And so he was actually my son's Spanish teacher in high school. My son just graduated from that school in May. And his son, Lucas, went to high school with my son, Jack. And so we know each other quite well and stay in touch. And he's been a real blessing in my life. He's a good man. Very good man.
Thank you for sharing that story as an educator. That's just a dream. We want to make impact. And most of the impact that educators make go unrevealed. So let's move forward. You get into college at West Virginia University, and it's an up and down journey. But you end up battling alcoholism.
Yes.
What eventually helped you to slay the demon of alcoholism?
Well, that one was probably the hardest one I've taken on in my life. Really, I didn't drink much in high school. I didn't drink until the summer before I went to college. I didn't drink much. And what I learned early on in college was that, again, I was having all of these symptoms of PTSD and I didn't know what they were. I didn't know that they were all related to one cause. And so I was having, it started with insomnia. I had insomnia. I had nightmares. I had flashbacks, which are basically a daytime version of a nightmare. And it can be triggered by a smell or a vision or a negative memory. And I had started having this kind of like chronic muscle tightness. It's called armoring. Began to have problems with my fight or flight response for no reason. It would be like a bomb threat was called in, but it's a nice Sunday afternoon. There were all these things that were happening in my world, and I didn't know what it was, but I found out early on that alcohol would cover it up. And so when I was struggling, I would just start drinking. And that is not a good solution. I'll tell you that right now, but that's what I did. I'm being honest. And so as I got out of college and got into my career, I did very well. But on the back end of that, if you peel back the curtain, you would see a lot of personal struggle outside of my work. And I drank more and more as I went from 22 or 23 into 30 or 33. And I remember just being someone who would drink on the weekends. Then I was someone who would drink like Thursday through Sunday. And then it was like, well, I'm going to try to take Monday and Tuesday off to give my body a break.
Mm.
And I had started going to see doctors when I was married to my first wife in my late 20s because she could see that there was something going on as well that was just unexplainable. And I was misdiagnosed for years with anxiety, with depression, with a personality disorder. I don't have those. I have PTSD.
Mm.
And so I was given
Mm.
medications that, it just dampened a disturbed psychology, so to speak, and
Yeah.
really just made me numb. And that wasn't the answer. And I just kept having to take stronger and stronger drugs. So I quit taking those medicines around 29 years old when I became a father. And I just used alcohol and I went to every day. And so by the time I got to 37, I was a very high functioning alcoholic. I was an executive, a CEO of my family business. And on the back end, I was drinking a tremendous amount of vodka. And
Wow.
I went to I started turning white. My skin started turning very white. I went to the doctor, and the doctor said, your liver is choosing to process alcohol in lieu of vitamins B and D in particular. And he said, if you continue this, you're going to die. And I'm 37. I'm divorced at this point. I've got a 10 or 11-year-old boy looking at me, looking up to me. And I'm sitting here saying, it'll be easier to go out with a bang, but what's that going to do to my son? And so
Mm.
that's when I began to um, come to the realization I needed to quit, and I couldn't.
Mm. Yeah.
And so basically, I was trying to quit every night, and I couldn't make it until 6:30 at night. I don't think I made it to 8 one evening without taking a drink. And
Wow.
I was having to moderate, and it wasn't doing my body any good. So I was deteriorating over several weeks. And at one point, just said, okay, well, I'm at the point where I give up. And so I went out to a bar with a friend. And that's when Jesus came rolling in. I I was in a bar at midnight, and I had gone out with a friend of mine who was from my hometown, and um, he could tell something was wrong. So we started talking about it, and he just looked at me and said, "Why don't you come to church with me?" And I just looked at him. I said, "You go to church?
Mm.
This is not a conversation that you have at midnight in a bar in Morgantown,
Mhm.
West Virginia."
Mhm.
Um, so it kind of caught me out of left field, and I just felt this feeling come over me, and I knew that it was a lifeline. And was I going to get another one? I didn't want to find out. So I just asked him what time, and I went. And eventually I went enough times that I made the decision I wanted to go away and get help. And so I went to rehab for 30 days and got clean. And that was April 1st, 2014. And I've never drank again, nor have I ever had the urge to drink again.
Wow. What role did turning to Christ play in that 1 month of rehab for you?
Oh, I can't even begin to explain how much of a turnaround I had in 30 days. But really, it started by going to church. When I started going to church before I chose to quit drinking, um, what I began to learn was that really the life that I was living was very much in conflict with the life that God had intended for me. And it was only after just hearing a pastor named Tim Herring just talk about God and Jesus and talk about the life we're intended to live and how our choices affect that. It was really only after hearing him preach that I started to realize that I needed to not only quit drinking, but I needed to change the focus in my life. I was getting by and surviving, and I needed to look further out than what I was looking. And so when I went away and I went to rehab, I found that the church that I was going to had a great deal of material on their website as far as old sermons and just, um, tidbits you could read and learn from. And so I started listening to sermons because I couldn't read the Bible. When you go to rehab, most rehabs put you on a tranquilizer, and that kind of tricks the brain into thinking that it's getting alcohol, but it's not, and allows your body to reset and not crave that every evening like I was having. And so I wasn't allowed to leave, but and go to church on Sunday, but I could listen to church. And I couldn't read the Bible. I couldn't go to church, but I could listen. And so I started listening. And I would listen to a sermon or two in the evenings, every evening. And it absolutely positively changed my life. I mean, in every way, shape, and form. And it's been a work in progress for the last 10 years and 4 months. I haven't stopped.
What did you learn about Jesus Christ through this experience? This
All kinds of things. First, he was there all along. I wasn't there for him, but he was there for me. And that's a wonderful feeling. It's awesome to go to a private school after the childhood I had and to have someone
Mm-hmm.
believe in me and be a backstop and be a
Mm-hmm.
mentor. And but to have the most awesome force in the universe who was not going to let me go. He infiltrated my drinking buddies to get to me and bring me to where I am. So if that doesn't say something about who Jesus Christ is, I don't know what does. I believe I was a dead man. I believe my son would have grown up and not have a father right now heading into college. And that was not an outcome that I wanted, nor was that an outcome that Jesus wanted. And so what I've learned about him is he's always there, one. And two, he'll never leave you and never forsake you. And it says it several times in the Bible. I quote it in chapter 12. It's Deuteronomy 31:8. And I can't put into words what that has meant to me.
In the book, you talked about how in alcohol rehab, that people started saying you were too positive. And what was that about?
I do. The nuances of rehab for those listeners of yours who hopefully haven't had the opportunity to go.
Yeah.
I like to bring humor into it. It's not to belittle. Look, it's a hard place in your life, but I think laughter helps you get over a lot of difficulty, right? And so I don't think of myself I don't gravitate to positivity easy. I see the negatives first and the landmines and try to navigate myself around them. So when I went to rehab, I was a fish out of water in that I was the only one at this particular facility who hadn't been to a rehab multiple times. And so being my first jaunt to a rehab facility, many people saw me as a rookie. And so my positivity was pretty much discounted in the fact that I was a rookie and I didn't know what was coming next, right? And now that I know the statistics of alcohol use disorder, well, it kind of makes sense, right? When you see that most people with alcohol use disorder, like 8 or 9 people in 10 with it, never seek help. And of the
Oh, wow.
1 or 2 in 10 who do seek help, only about 1 in 10 of those people make it to the 4 year mark of sobriety. And so we're not talking
Wow.
about drugs here, just alcohol. That is a pretty strong statistic there, right? And so I'm assuming now, looking back at it, that's where people are coming from. So they would, many of the people there they would use this terminology called a pink cloud, and I had no idea what a pink cloud was. And I took the
Yeah.
attitude that I didn't care either. I told the doctor when I was admitted into the rehab clinic, I just looked at him and I said, look, I'm going to beat this. You can write this on my chart. I'm not doing this again. And I just set my mind to that. So when I would be in meetings or I would be asked to talk about my difficulties, when given an opportunity, I would make that plug. And all of my cohorts in rehab would say, you're just on a pink cloud. And what a pink cloud is I say it at the end of chapter 10. A pink cloud is when someone is an addict and they initially get clean and have good feelings in their body, it tends to be a limited feeling, because at some point they begin to realize that they have to deal with all of the core issues that drove them to drink or use drugs, right? When you go to a rehab clinic, you don't see a lot of people who just love alcohol. They're all drinking or they're all using drugs because they've had some difficulty in their past that has brought them here. And that is pretty universal in my experience. So that's where pink clouds come from.
So you end up, and forgive me the timing, you end up at Harvard, right?
Yes.
And you get a degree from Harvard. Was this before or after alcohol rehab?
It was after. Let me see, I quit drinking in 14, and I believe I applied to Harvard within 12 months of getting sober. And I graduated from there in 2017.
So let's just celebrate that. Your journey to Harvard is a remarkable story. Your elementary teacher sits you down with your parents and has the audacity to say, this kid will never go to college. And because I just shudder to hear that. But then thanks to some other teachers you had who expressed belief in the journey you had, how did you end up at Harvard, John?
Well, it's crazy. So I don't tell this story in the book, but I've always been someone who likes to read, who likes to learn. I'm a very driven person, and even being a raging alcoholic, I was very successful in my career because of my work ethic and just my desire to be better. And so God gave me those traits, and I've always been a fighter. I'm not someone who looks at myself as a victim or says, well, I got bad grades and so said this, so I'm going to quit. That's not in my cards. And so when I got sober, what I found is I had a pile of time and I had way more money in my bank account. And so I took the time that I had and some of that money, and I just bought a lot of books and I just read after work. And I just practiced that habit everywhere. So I was a member of the Young Presidents Organization for years, and it's just a learning and networking organization, and it's for presidents and CEOs who are under 45 in age. And there are many, many, many learning opportunities that happen throughout the year all over the world. And so I went to one in the Caribbean, and I was on a beach in the West Indies, I guess. No, the British Virgin Islands, I'm sorry. And there was a happy hour event, and I just quit drinking, so I'm not going to roll over the bar and hang out at happy hour. I sat on the beach and I was reading a book. And here's the way that some of these things happen is just I mean, it's attention getting. A guy rolls up to me on the beach in a wheelchair. I don't know if you've ever seen that before, but I hadn't. Guy rolls up to me in a wheelchair and says, "What are you reading?" So I don't remember the book I was reading, but I think it was on leadership. And so we started talking about the book, and he knew it. He knew of the book. So we started talking about that. And he said, "Well, what do you think of the learning event? You know, X, Y, and Z." Asked me some more questions. And then he starts asking me, "What do you do in your career?" And I start telling him, and I just gave him a kind of a helicopter view of I run a family business, and I had maybe 600 employees at the time, and was working in West Virginia and maybe 8 other states, and doing a lot of different types of constructions, dams, airports, highways, bridges, energy infrastructure. And the guy was pretty interested in it. And he looks at me and he says, have you ever looked into going to any of the graduate programs at Harvard? And John, I just busted out laughing at the guy. I'm just like, what? Like, they're not letting me in there. Come on. Right. And here's where I start listening to the naysayers, right? I believed something that wasn't true. I thought that I wasn't worthy or that I couldn't hang there or that I wouldn't get in. And I said as much to him. And he just very nicely looked at me and he said, do you like this island? And I said, yeah, it's pretty nice. Yeah, I do. And he said, that's good. It's my island. And when I give you a piece of advice, I would recommend you take it in a very nice way. And so I'm looking at this guy like, what is going on? And he said, my name is David V. Johnson, and I'm from Detroit, Michigan. And if you get online at Harvard and you download an application and you fill it out, you can put my name at the bottom. And so I'm just like, for days, I'm thinking about this on this trip. And I get home and I did it. And I put David V. Johnson's name at the bottom. And I was accepted within like literally 2 or 3 weeks from when I sent it in. And so when I was accepted and I got that email, I was like Rocky Balboa running up the steps in Philadelphia, preparing to fight Apollo Creed. I was just elated because I didn't think that was possible. And so it took almost until 40 years old to get into a university like that and be able to go and learn what I did, right? It's not about the degree. It's about the tools you get in your head, right? And it was a wonderful place to go to school and phenomenal experience. And I write a lot about it in my book.
Where do you see the hand of God in that experience?
Everywhere. Everywhere. What I've learned over time is that there are no coincidences and everything happens for a reason. And if you're not looking for those opportunities with eyes of faith, you're going to miss them. And so it's critical to stay grounded. And I wonder how many opportunities I miss by not staying grounded all the time. But the hand of God, all over that. I mean, I don't know that you could make that story up.
That's a movie story right there, brother.
6th and 10th grade. Yeah. What a blessing.
Yeah, so you were second to last in your class in 10th grade, right? And then you end up with a Harvard degree.
Yes.
And you tell a story in your book about your son attending your graduation. I thought that was really cool.
Mm.
And somebody turns to your son and says, well, you tell us the story.
So I think you're referring to the last chapter of my book, and I'm a storyteller because that's what most people from the Appalachian Mountains do, right? And so I tell a book full of stories that just so happens to cover my life.
Yeah.
And I tell a story about taking my son to Europe. And I wanted, my son's 12 at the time or 13, and I was going into my last year in business school at Harvard. And so I took my son to Europe for a couple weeks, and we went and visited some of my classmates, some of my closest classmates, good friends of mine to this day. And when we were in London, in England, we went and hung out with my classmate William, and we talked some about my son about, his plans in his life. And it's kind of tricky when you're talking to a 12 or 13-year-old boy, right? But part of the reason I wanted to go over was so that my son could meet some of my friends. And I didn't know that he was going to be able to attend my graduation that fall. So it was in the summer. And really, I just kind of wanted my friends to leave an impression on him, right? I mean, it's one thing to hear it from dad, but it's quite another to hear it from very qualified, very highly intelligent individuals from, outside the US, right? And so we had very productive conversations, one with my friend William in England. And it was just encouraging to my son that, hey, you can be anything you want to be. You've got to set your mind to it, and you've got to give it all the effort you've got, right? And the same with my friend Thomas in Germany. And it was really neat because my son ended up being able to come to graduation and to circle back around and see those guys one last time. And yeah, it was great for him and in his future. And in one of those days, my friend William asked my son Jack, "Do you think you'll ever go to Harvard?" And my son, I forget exactly how he answered him,
Yeah.
but my son was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Well, you're kind of putting a little pressure on him there, William." But I didn't say anything. And not to give all of the ending of my book away, but my son did get into Harvard as a 15-year-old. And
Yeah.
man, crazy. Like a few weeks before his 16th birthday. And he went up there and went to a summer program and took 8 hours and did very well. And it just continues, right? That's the hand of God.
Yeah.
The really neat thing about that was the day he was accepted was my grandfather, Jack's 100th birthday. My grandfather died,
Mm.
maybe 20 years ago. But at that
Mm.
point, for it to be on February 22nd, 2022, 22222, and to be accepted on my grandfather's 100th birthday was pretty obvious. That was God. You can't make that
Oh
up.
man. I just think that's so awesome because I keep going back to that part where you're in 5th or 6th grade and your teacher's telling you you're not a. I think your teacher's probably having a hard time believing you're even going to graduate.
No doubt.
I mean, I just love it. It just inspires me.
Yeah.
In your book, you tell us when your friend is in trouble, don't annoy him by asking, "Is there anything you can do?" Think of something appropriate you can do and do it. And I think that was your friend Ken. What could you tell us about Ken? Is that
Yeah.
type of kind of friend?
So just to tee up what you're talking about, I in my last chapter, I write about not about myself. The book really, until you get to the end, you don't realize, but the book is more about those people who helped me than me.
Mm.
And in my last chapter, I showcase a few of my teachers and my really close friends and what they've done for me. And Ken, in particular, I didn't meet until college, and we were in engineering school together at West Virginia University. And in the fourth day of my freshman year, this is on a Thursday, I didn't even make it to Friday, John, I was arrested. I was arrested for driving under the influence in 1995. And so I was in the wrong places. I had made the wrong friends, and I'm 4 days deep into school. And that is why I put the quote in there from, I mispronounce his last name, but Leo Biscaglia. He's an American novelist, and he's the one who wrote that quote. And
Oh, okay.
um, it embodies Ken because when that happened, most people that I knew, most people who knew me, made fun of me, made light of my poor choice, and hey, I deserved it, sure. But my closest friends and one person that I just met, Ken, didn't do that. And Ken was always looking for ways to do something or include me in his group. And I have always appreciated that. We still remain good friends. I just was talking to him yesterday evening. And he really has been a blessing to me because he's someone who doesn't ask, "Hey, do you need something?" He just He's somebody who believes in action, and he does it, and it's awesome. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
touching
We all
too,
need friends like that.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So through your
absolutely.
journey, John, through your journey, John, who is Jesus Christ come to be for you?
so much. To me, I hear others say, well, it's a relationship. And yeah, it is. It is. It's a relationship. And you can make that relationship as close or as distant as you want to. But no matter what you make it, he loves you. And he loves you where you are, right? He loved me when I was at my worst. And he loves me when I'm at my best. And I'm sure he would look at my best and say I could probably do way better. But he's a guiding light. He's an example. He is a teacher. He is someone who shows love. He is someone who can go into dysfunction and make your world or your family's world or your company's world functional. Jesus Christ is a hope giver, and the words that he has spoken in the Gospels and the Bible, they give the hopeless power. I could go on, but Jesus to me has been someone who hasn't left me. He hasn't disappointed me. He's been there for me even when I haven't been there for him. And so to me, he's someone I want to talk about. He's someone I want to write about. He's someone that will leave 99 to get the one astray. And coming from the one who was astray, to have this story, to be afforded the opportunity to write a book about that journey and about him is just very humbling. And I will tell you that I didn't deserve it. I'll be straight up. I don't deserve it. And that's his grace. He thinks I do. And so I just see it as I have a job to do. And I'm going to wake up and try my best to do it every day. And that is to just share my story of where I was before him, or where I was before I accepted him, and then what happened afterwards. And I'm just so humbled to be able to share, especially with those struggling, that, look, I tried everything you could try. And I tried just basically anything and everything out there. and it didn't work, but this did. And it says in the Bible to delight yourself in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. And it says in Psalm that taste and see the Lord is good. Blessed are those who seek his shelter, right? When you read and you listen to his promises and you pursue him, they will come true.
You've had a lot of trauma, John, an amazing story and journey. How do you find peace in Christ amidst the chaos of the world we're in today, and also dealing with PTSD symptoms?
Yeah, that's a challenge. It's not a challenge to find peace in Christ. It's a challenge to shed yourself of the worldly worries, right, that get in the way of you being able to seek him. And when I'm challenged, when I have difficult days or difficult times, I do struggle with going there first sometimes, to be honest with you. And I think that struggle is natural, and it's okay to talk about, because we're not perfect beings. We're not at all. And we're not expected to be. Our heart needs to be in the right place, and we need to make sure that we're pursuing the right things and not the wrong things. Worldly riches, desires of the flesh, things of that nature are hurdles to your relationship in some sense with Jesus, right? And through those things, because you know the answer, where peace comes from. When you're able to attack the problem the right way and see the obstacle for what it is, and knowing that you always have Jesus on the other side of that hurdle is reassuring. It's comforting. And I believe that is the nature of peace, to be reassured and be comforted, to know that there is an answer, and to know what comes after we die. I don't know what could give you more peace than that. And so anyway, there's a reason why it says in the Bible 365 times to fear not. And that is, we're anxious beings, and we do fear what we see. And faith is something that you can't see, right? Um, it says in Hebrews, I think it's chapter 11, that faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you do not see, and that the faith of a mustard seed can move a mountain. You know, there's a lot to that. Peace is all in your approach. And when you approach your difficulties the right way, and you realize that it's not in your hands, that the most difficult of problems or adversity it's not overcome with your hands. It's overcome with his hands. It takes a lot of worry away, and it allows you to be able to, searching for the right word, to be able to rest in peace and focus on the worries of today. Not the worries of today, but what you're doing in each day. Not to look ahead, not to focus on anything that's going to generate and make you overly worrisome.
You're a powerful story for the power of Jesus Christ in our life and what it can do and how it can change us and how it can give us hope and give us strength to make it through our journey and to overcome the obstacles and challenges, but also to realize that we're still fighting the journey, right? You probably still struggle with symptoms from time to time of PTSD. You say that in the book. And life moves
every day.
on. Last question. If you were talking to someone who's battling PTSD, just speak to them for a minute from your heart and give them some hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to lead with a quote from Bessel van der Kolk. He is a psychologist, a trauma-centric and focused psychologist at Boston University. And he wrote a very famous book about 10 years ago called The Body Keeps the Score. And he has this quote in here I just love. It says that, unlike other forms of psychological disorders, the core issue in trauma is reality. And I think that is so important to lead off when you talk about trauma, because when you're someone who is a survivor, you feel the need to hide what happened to you. You feel embarrassed. You want to, I think, gravitate to just keeping that struggle internal and not sharing because you're scared that everybody's going to think of you like you're crazy, and you're not. The reality is that when a child, especially, is to heightened trauma, whether it be abuse, neglect, sexual abuse, all of those difficulties cause many of the same symptoms. And so when you're a young person and you're exposed to a heightened amount of trauma and for an extended period of time, it changes the architecture of the developing brain. It changes your neural networks. It rewires your neural pathways and your sensory pathways. And your human brain allows you to adapt as a child to very stressful situations. And that same wiring causes you difficulty as an adult. PTSD is called a disorder of reactions. And those reactions come from the experiences you had as a child, the difficult ones. And so all of the symptoms that you may be struggling with, you may not even know that what you have going on, that they're all related. And I would just say this, no matter where you are with it, no matter if you've started having symptoms, if you've had a childhood like that, you don't have them yet, you've become a parent and you've started to have flashbacks, which I did in my early 30s. Go and get help. But make sure when you go in and go get help that you talk about your childhood, because there are so many cases of PTSD being misdiagnosed, and mine was misdiagnosed for 10 years. And the reason why is the disguised presentation. And it's not your fault as a survivor for going in and just telling your doctor what's wrong in this instance, because you don't necessarily see that the dots need connected between symptoms. that disguised presentation doesn't necessarily allow the doctor to give you the right verdict on what's wrong. Verdict may be the wrong medical term, but the right diagnosis, so that you know what you're fighting and how you can win. And with PTSD in particular, I don't know that there's a win there. Um, there's ways to influence it in better, more conducive ways that you can live your life. And for me, Christianity has been one of those places. So I would just challenge you, if you're someone struggling with the symptoms that I've talked about, or the dynamic in childhood, to go get help and get diagnosed, and know that there is a guy who cares, and no matter what. His name's Jesus. And I promise you, if you seek him, you'll be amazed at what can happen. And just one more thing: if you've struggled for a long time like I have, and you have you're miring in alcohol or drug use, it's okay. That guy Jesus, he loves you where you are. And if you knock, he will answer. He answered for me, and he will answer for you. And it says it in the Bible. And when God promises something, he'll deliver. So just know that you're not alone, and that if you're struggling right now with drugs or alcohol, and you may have some of these symptoms I've talked about, you've got to get up and fight. In boxing, you don't lose when you're knocked down. You lose if you stay down. And you've just got to get back up. If you struggle with relapsing over and over, get back up and keep fighting. Don't give up. Don't give up. That's my message. And thank you for letting me say that.
Yeah, it reminds me of, come unto me, take my yoke upon you. Forgive me, I'm kind of struggling with that scripture right now for some reason, but
Matthew 11:28.
Yeah, it's such a beautiful scripture, right? It's yoked together with Christ. And team up with him would be a modern way of saying that, modern translation. Team up with Jesus Christ, walk with him. And that's why I want to share these messages with people, is because I believe that walking with Jesus Christ can help us through our adversities and our struggles. Jesus isn't there at the end of the tunnel saying, come to me, walk this tunnel in the dark all by yourself, and then I'll be here at the end. I think he's walking with us. And that when we make it a conscious priority to look to him, that we can feel his love and his peace like you describe. That will help us walk through that tunnel, that ever so dark tunnel. And we can fill it with his love. John, before we leave today, where can people find your book and learn more about you?
Great question. So you can find my book, hardback, paperback, Kindle version, or an audiobook on Amazon.com. Just type in John Boyle and Appalachian Kid, and it will come up and give you options. I can be found at AppalachianKid.com, and I can also be found on LinkedIn, John P. Boyle. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a lot of fun today.
I thank everybody for joining us today on this episode of Walking with the Savior, and encourage you to have a great walk with your Savior. Have a great day, everybody.